I'm Elena Carter. I'm 34 years old. Few days ago I went to the office and pretended to be a woman looking for a job. I sat in the lobby with a folder in my hand like I was desperate for work. Nobody there knew the truth. Nobody knew that the tall glass building above me, the company with the shining logo on the wall, was actually mine. I had built it when I was young, when I had nothing but an idea and the will to fight for it. I had coded the first product. I had pitched to the first investor. I had signed the first contracts. But I had hidden my name so deeply that now even the people at the top did not know who the real founder was. My husband Daniel came walking through the lobby that morning, proud in his dark suit. He passed me without a glance. He did not even slow down. To him, I was invisible. To him I was invisible. To him I was just his wife, a woman with no career, no purpose, nothing to her name. He always introduced me as jobless to his friends, and they always laughed. He had no idea that the company he claimed to run, the empire he bragged about, was mine. He and his circle thought they had built it, but really they were living inside walls I had created. They were mocking the very person who gave them the roof over their heads, and they did not even know it. I left that building with a smile on my face. Because every insult, every laugh, every time they called me useless, it only made my revenge sharper. They believed they had erased me. They believed I was only Daniel's wife. They believed I had no power. Soon they would learn the truth. That night, Daniel invited his friends over to our penthouse. The city sparkled outside like 1,000 tiny flames. Inside, the men filled the room with their loud voices, expensive cigars, and arrogance. Their wives came too, glittering in jewels, their eyes darting at me with pity and superiority. I wore a plain black dress. Nothing bright, nothing fancy. I wanted them to see me as small. I wanted them to think I was nobody. Hidden in the hem of that dress was a recorder, quietly collecting every word. We sat at the long dining table covered with roasted lamb, golden desserts, and red wine. Marcus, the CFO, looked at me with his smug grin and said, "Elena, how's life without a job treating you? Must be nice to do yoga all day while the men run the world." The table burst into laughter. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said, "She tries her best, Marcus. But running a company, my wife can barely balance a checkbook." More laughter followed. Their wives smiled politely, some shaking their heads, some whispering to each other. I smiled too, the way they expected me to. I let them think their words cut me down. But inside I was calm. I had already gathered documents. I had already sent recordings to Clara, my lawyer. I already had Victor inside the company sending me information, and Ava the journalist waiting for my signal. Every cruel laugh that night was being recorded. Every insult would one day play back in their ears when the world turned against them. Later I excused myself and went to Daniel's study. His desk held a secret safe, hidden behind a panel. He thought only he knew the code, but he had set it to our wedding date, the kind of code he thought was clever but was really arrogant. I opened it and found what I expected. Files, contracts, hidden accounts. I photographed them all with my encrypted phone. Offshore money, fake deals, bribes paid to silence people. Everything I needed was there. When I returned, Adrian, the COO, was speaking. His voice was low and cold. He said, "You know, women like Elena need to be kept in line. Otherwise they start thinking they're equal." The men laughed again, raising their glasses. Daniel laughed too, proud to be part of the pack. I looked at Adrian and thought about the reports Victor had given me. Women at the company who had been harassed, threatened, forced to leave. Adrian had covered it up. Daniel had approved it. All of them had signed off on it. In that moment I knew my revenge wasn't just for me. It was for every woman they had destroyed. When the guests left and Daniel stumbled to bed, I stayed awake. I uploaded the photos and recordings to Clara's server. She messaged me back right away saying it was enough to bury them. She asked if I was ready. I looked at Daniel asleep in the bed. The man who had once charmed me, the man who had stolen my company. I whispered to myself, yes. I want them destroyed. I thought back to when I first built Carter Technologies. I remembered the small apartment, the smell of burnt coffee, the excitement of making something real out of nothing. I remembered the first time my code worked. I remembered the first time an investor said yes. I also remembered Daniel in those days, charming, supportive, pretending to care. He told me to let him help. He told me to step back for my health. I trusted him, I signed papers I thought were temporary, but they gave him the power he wanted. He forced me out, left me with nothing but the role of his wife. But what he never knew was that I had hidden one thing in those papers. The majority shares were still mine. He had the crown, but I had the throne. At 2 in the morning I heard footsteps. Daniel appeared at the door, his eyes sharp. He asked me what I was doing. I smiled and said I was reading. He came close, kissed my forehead and whispered, "Good, because if I ever found out you were hiding something from me, you'd regret it." Then he left. My heart raced, but I felt no fear. His suspicion only told me he was already uneasy. When the sun rose, I stood at the window with the morning light on my face, telling myself that soon everyone would know the truth. I was no longer just Daniel's wife. I was the founder, the real owner, and I was coming back as their executioner. From that moment I moved carefully. But every step was part of my plan. Daniel left for work, kissing me on the cheek as if nothing in the world was wrong. He thought I was the same silent woman he had mocked the night before. He didn't see that I was already sharpening the knife behind my smile. As soon as he was gone, I opened my laptop and checked the files I had sent to Clara. She had already organized them into folders with names that made the crimes clear: offshore accounts, hush money, fraud, harassment. She sent me a message: "We have more than enough to expose them, but the more evidence we gather, the stronger the blow will be. Keep going, don't stop now." I typed back, "I won't stop until they lose everything." That same morning I went to meet Victor. We chose a small cafe far from the city center, a place with peeling paint and weak coffee. Perfect for talking without being noticed. Victor looked tired, his eyes heavy, his hands restless. He was still working inside the company, pretending to be loyal, but secretly sending me everything he found. He slid an envelope across the table. "More internal emails," he whispered. "There's something bigger going on, Elena. They're not just stealing money, they're moving things, shipments. I don't know what's inside, but it's not good." I opened the envelope under the table. Printed emails showed Adrian and Marcus talking in code, using phrases like deliveries, protection, and Doc 3. I felt a chill. This wasn't only about money, this was about something darker. I asked Victor if he was safe. He shook his head. "If they even suspect me, I'm done. But I can't stand watching them destroy people anymore." "Do what you have to do." I promised him that when the time came he would be safe. But inside I knew the danger was real. That evening Daniel came home in a good mood. He poured himself whiskey and told me about a big deal he and Adrian were working on. He bragged that if it went through, the company's value would double. He called it Project Lantern. I pretended not to care, nodding as if I barely understood what he was talking about. But inside I remembered the word from the emails. Project Lantern. I now knew what to look for. When Daniel finally went to bed, I stayed up again. I sent Clara the new emails. She replied quickly, "If Project Lantern is what I think it is, this isn't just corporate corruption. This is criminal on a level that could put them in prison for decades. Keep digging." The next day I went to meet Ava, the journalist. We met in a quiet park, sitting on a bench like two old friends. I told her what I had found so far, without giving her everything. I needed her ready, but I couldn't release the storm too soon. She leaned closer and whispered, "Elena, when you drop this, it will be everywhere. Front page news. But you need to be ready for the blowback. They'll come after you. They'll smear you. They'll try to destroy your name before you destroy theirs." I nodded. "Let them try. I've been silent long enough. When I speak, it will be with proof, and proof is louder than lies." The following evening Daniel hosted another private meeting at our home. Adrian, Marcus, and 2 other executives came over. They sat in the study with the door closed, drinking and whispering. They thought I wasn't paying attention, but I had placed a small device in the room earlier. As they laughed and cursed, the recorder caught every word. I listened later, alone in the dark. Marcus was talking about moving money through fake charities. Adrian was bragging about silencing an employee who had threatened to go public. Then Daniel's voice came, calm and cold. "As long as Elena stays quiet, we have nothing to worry about. She's nothing without me. She's nobody." I clenched my fists. Nobody? That was what he thought of me. The man who had stolen my company, stolen my name, stolen my years of work, truly believed I was nothing. I smiled to myself in the silence of the room. If he thought I was nobody, then he would never see the blade coming. 2 days later, I got another message from Victor. He wanted to meet urgently. We met in the same cafe. He looked pale, nervous, looking over his shoulder. He handed me a USB stick. "Doc cameras," he said. "Watch it when you're alone. Then you'll understand what Project Lantern is." His hands shook as he spoke. "Be careful, Elena. You're walking on fire now." That night I plugged the USB into my laptop. Grainy footage appeared on the screen. Late at night, trucks backed into the loading dock at the company's warehouse. Men carried crates inside. The cameras caught Daniel shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. The crates were labeled with false names, but the codes on them didn't lie. They weren't just moving stolen money, they were moving dangerous things. Illegal things. Weapons. My stomach tightened as I watched. I realized this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was about stopping something that could destroy lives far beyond my own. Clara was right. This was bigger than corporate greed. I sat back in my chair, my hands shaking slightly, but my mind clear. The trap was almost ready. The evidence was piling up. But I also knew Daniel was beginning to sense something. He had been watching me more closely. He had been asking me more questions, subtle at first, but sharper every day. The game had truly begun, and I was ready. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, my heart pounding from what I had just seen. Those crates in the warehouse, the late-night deals, the way Daniel shook hands like nothing was wrong. It was worse than I imagined. They weren't just stealing money. They weren't just harassing workers. They were involved in something much darker, and now I had the proof. I sat there in the dim light of the study, my hands trembling but my mind clear. This wasn't only about revenge anymore. This was about justice. It was about stopping something dangerous before it grew too big to control. The next morning, Daniel acted as if nothing was happening. He walked around the kitchen in his tailored suit, sipping his coffee, scrolling through his phone, barely even looking at me. He kissed me on the cheek before leaving, but his kiss felt like an order, not affection. "Be ready for Friday," he said. "Big investors coming, just smile and look supportive. That's all you need to do." He didn't know that by Friday, or soon after, the ground beneath him would begin to collapse. As soon as the door closed, I picked up my phone and called Clara. I told her about the footage, about the crates, about the handshake. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Elena, this confirms everything. If those shipments are what I think they are, it's not just corporate crime. It's federal. We'll have to move carefully. If they sense you know too much, they'll panic, and when powerful men panic, they get dangerous." I told her I was ready for danger. She sighed, then said, "I'll start preparing warrants, but keep collecting. The more you have, the less chance they'll have to escape." Later that day, I met Ava in another quiet park, the same place as before. I handed her a copy of the warehouse footage. She put on her headphones and watched on her laptop, her face tightening with every second. When it ended, she looked at me with eyes wide. "This isn't just corruption, Elena. This is trafficking, maybe weapons, maybe worse. If you expose this, it will make global news. But you need to be prepared for the storm. They'll fight back, and not just with words." I nodded slowly. "Let them fight. I've been silent long enough. It's their turn to be afraid." That night we hosted another dinner. Daniel loved these evenings because they gave him a stage. His friends filled our penthouse with laughter, arrogance, and smoke. Their wives sat quietly, some smiling, some whispering, some pretending not to notice the way their husbands bragged and insulted. I poured wine. I smiled. I laughed when they made cruel jokes. Marcus leaned back in his chair and asked, "So, Elena, still jobless? Must be nice to live off Daniel's success." Everyone laughed again. Daniel smirked proudly. "She's the perfect wife," he said. "Beautiful, obedient, and she doesn't meddle in things she doesn't understand." I wanted to laugh louder than all of them, because none of them knew the truth. They were mocking the very person who had given them everything. They were laughing at the founder of the company. They thought I was powerless, but I was recording every word. One day soon, their own voices would condemn them in front of the world. After the guests left, Daniel came into the study where I was tidying the table. He stood in the doorway, watching me. His eyes were different now, sharper, colder. "You've been staying up late a lot," he said. "What are you doing all night, Elena?" "Reading." I looked at him calmly and nodded. "Yes, just reading. I can't sleep." He smiled. But it wasn't a real smile. "Good. Because if you were hiding something from me, you'd regret it. His words hung in the air like a blade. I met his eyes and said softly, I'm not hiding anything. He left the room, but I knew he didn't believe me. He was suspicious now. The game was tightening. The following day, Victor sent me another message. He said he had something urgent, something I had to see. We met in the same cafe as before, and he handed me a folder. Inside were board meeting notes written by hand, not meant to be kept. The notes mentioned Project Lantern again, but this time with more detail. It spoke of moving large sums of money overseas, protecting deliveries and paying off certain officials to look the other way. My chest grew tight as I read. This wasn't just a scam. This was organized crime, spreading its roots deep. Victor looked at me with fear in his eyes. If they find out I'm the one leaking this, I'm done. They'll ruin me. They'll ruin my family. I put my hand on his and said, I won't let that happen. When this is over, you'll be free. You'll be safe. But inside, I knew the danger was real. That evening, when Daniel was in the shower, I unlocked his phone with the code I had memorized long ago. I went through his messages. Most were business, some were personal, but then I found one thread with Adrian. The messages were short and sharp. Shipment confirmed. Dock 3, Friday night. Another message followed. Elena's been acting strange. Keep an eye. My blood went cold. They were watching me too. I quickly forwarded the messages to my secure server and deleted the trace. By the time Daniel stepped out of the shower, I was in bed pretending to sleep. He lay down beside me, and for a moment I felt his eyes on me in the dark. I kept my breathing steady, pretending to dream while my mind raced with plans. The next morning, I met Clara in her office. We laid out all the evidence on her desk: documents, photos, recordings, videos. The pile was growing taller every day. Clara looked at me seriously. Elena, we have enough to end them, but we need the right moment. At the shareholder meeting, in front of everyone, you reveal who you really are. You reveal the evidence. That's when they'll fall, but you need to be careful until then. If they sense the trap too early, they'll lash out, and you know what men like them do when they're desperate. I nodded. I know, but I'm not afraid anymore. They took everything from me once. This time, I'm taking everything from them. That night, Daniel came home later than usual. His tie was loose, his face red from drinking. He dropped into a chair and looked at me with tired eyes. You've changed, he said quietly. You used to be soft. Now you look at me differently. What are you hiding, Elena? I smiled gently, pouring him another drink. I'm just getting older, Daniel. That's all. He studied me for a long time, then finally nodded. But I knew he wasn't convinced. I went to bed that night, knowing one thing clearly: the storm was coming. The evidence was ready. The allies were waiting. Daniel and his friends thought they still controlled the game, but I was the one holding the cards. And when the time came, I would play them all at once, and their empire would collapse in front of their eyes. The storm I had been waiting for finally arrived. Days passed in silence. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot. Daniel moved around the house with his usual arrogance, but I could feel it. He was restless, suspicious, watching me more closely with every day. His friends still laughed, still bragged, still mocked me. But I saw the cracks forming in their circle. They were worried about Project Lantern, worried about the shipments, worried about the whispers spreading through the company. They just didn't know that the whispers were my doing. The shareholder meeting was set for Friday morning. It was the perfect stage. Everyone who mattered would be there. Board members, investors, senior managers, even some journalists Daniel had invited to show off his supposed success. He wanted to prove his greatness, but he had no idea that this would be the day everything ended for him. This would be the day I stopped hiding. The night before the meeting, I prepared everything with Clara. She had organized the evidence into a clear presentation: documents, contracts, secret recordings, videos from the docks, everything neatly lined up, one piece of proof after another, like bullets ready to fire. I looked at the files on her desk, and for the first time in years, I felt whole again. I was no longer Daniel's silent wife. I was Elena Carter, founder of Carter Technologies, and tomorrow the world would know it. When I returned home, Daniel was already drunk. He sat in the living room with Adrian and Marcus. Their voices low, their faces tense. They stopped talking when I walked in. Daniel gave me a long look, then forced a smile. Elena, Tomorrow is a big day, just smile, nod and stay quiet like you always do. That's all I need from you. His words were a command, not a request. I smiled back, but in my heart I whispered, "Tomorrow, Daniel, I won't be silent." The morning of the meeting, the building buzzed with energy. Men in suits rushed through the halls, women carried folders and tablets. Cameras were being set up at the back of the room. Everyone expected a show of power. And they would get one, but not the one Daniel had planned. I walked in wearing a sharp black suit. My hair tied neatly back. For the first time, I did not dress to disappear. I dressed to be seen. Daniel stood at the podium, smiling his perfect smile. Adrian sat beside him, smug and confident. Marcus whispered to a board member, laughing quietly. They had no idea what was coming. Daniel began his speech, talking about growth, about profit, about how Carter Technologies was reaching new heights under his leadership. The room clapped politely. Cameras flashed. I stayed seated, calm and silent, until the moment came. Clara stood up first, her voice firm. "Before we continue, there is an urgent matter to be addressed. A matter concerning ownership, leadership and the future of this company." The room fell quiet. Daniel frowned, looking at her with irritation. "This isn't the time, Clara. Sit down." But Clara didn't move. She turned toward me and nodded. It was my signal. I rose from my seat. The room turned to look at me, surprised. Some of them whispered, confused about why Daniel's wife was standing in the middle of a shareholder meeting. Daniel's smile faltered. "Elena, what are you doing?" he said, his voice sharp. I walked to the podium, steady and calm. My voice carried through the hall. "My name is Elena Carter. I am 34 years old. And I am the founder of Carter Technologies." The room gasped. A ripple of shock spread through the audience. Investors looked at each other in disbelief. The journalists leaned forward, their pens and cameras ready. Daniel laughed, but it was nervous, not joyful. "She's confused," he said quickly. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." I turned toward him, my eyes locked on his. "No, Daniel, I know exactly what I'm talking about. I built this company before you ever walked through the door. I created it. I funded it, and when you tricked me into stepping back, I left you something you never realized. My majority shares. You may have stolen the title, but the company has always been mine." Gasps filled the room. Daniel's face turned pale. Adrian sat frozen, his smirk gone. Marcus muttered under his breath, his hands trembling. I raised my hand and Clara began the presentation. The screen lit up with documents, offshore accounts, false contracts, bribery payments. The room filled with their own signatures, their own words. Then came the recordings. Their laughter, their insults, their threats. The audience heard Marcus mocking me. Daniel calling me useless. Adrian saying women needed to be kept in line. The sound of their arrogance filled the hall and every word was a nail in their coffin. Then the final blow. The video from the docks. The grainy footage showed Daniel shaking hands with dangerous men, crates being moved in the dead of night. The words Project Lantern appeared on the screen. Clara explained it clearly: illegal shipments, fraudulent deals, money laundering. The room exploded with whispers, gasps and shouts. Daniel stood up, his face red, his voice shaking. "This is lies, she's making this up." He looked around the room, desperate for support. But no one spoke for him. No one believed him. The proof was too strong, the truth was too loud. I looked at him calm and steady. "Daniel, for years you mocked me. You told your friends I was jobless, useless, nothing, but today everyone knows the truth. This company is mine, and you and every one of your corrupt friends are finished." I turned to the board. "As majority shareholder, I hereby remove Daniel Carter, Adrian Blake, Marcus Stone and every executive involved in these crimes from their positions. Effective immediately." The board members looked at the documents, at the contracts, at the signatures. One by one they nodded. Some looked ashamed, some looked relieved, some looked shocked, but none of them could deny the truth. The vote passed, it was unanimous. Daniel and his circle were out. The room erupted into chaos. Journalists rushed forward, cameras flashing, microphones raised, questions flew through the air. Daniel tried to shout over them, his voice breaking, but nobody listened. Security guards entered and moved toward him and his friends. Adrian stood, trying to argue, but his face was white with fear. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, sweating, his hands shaking. I stood there at the podium, calm, powerful, unshaken. For years they had laughed at me, mocked me, dismissed me. For years they had called me jobless. But now the world knew the truth. I was the founder, I was the owner, I was the woman who had built the empire they had tried to steal. As Daniel was dragged out of the room, he looked at me with hatred in his eyes. His voice was low, but I heard it clearly. You think you've won, Elena, but you don't know everything. You don't know what's really behind this. You don't know the full truth. His words sent a chill through me. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of unease. What did he mean? What truth was still hidden? I didn't show it on my face. I kept my expression cold and strong. But inside I knew this wasn't over. Exposing them was only the beginning. There was something deeper, something darker waiting in the shadows. Daniel's words echoed in my mind long after he was dragged out of the shareholder meeting. He had looked at me with so much hatred, his voice low but sharp, saying, "You think you've won, Elena. But you don't know everything. You don't know what's really behind this." The room had been filled with noise. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, board members whispering in shock. But all I could hear was his warning. I had struck him down, I had stripped him of his crown, but he was right about one thing. This wasn't over. The fire had only just started. That night, after the meeting, I went home to an empty penthouse. Daniel didn't come back, and I didn't expect him to. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the city lights. For the first time I could breathe freely in this house, but I also knew that freedom was fragile. Men like Daniel didn't accept defeat. Men like Adrian and Marcus didn't disappear quietly. They were snakes, and when snakes are cornered, they bite. Clara called me that evening. Her voice was calm but urgent. "Elena, I've already spoken with the authorities. They will be opening investigations into Project Lantern and the other evidence we presented. But we need to be careful. Men like Daniel still have contacts, still have allies in the shadows. They will try to fight back. Be ready." I told her I had been ready for years. Still I couldn't shake the unease Daniel's words had left in me. What truth was I missing? The very next morning, I saw the first strike. The headline on the news screamed across the screen, "CEO's wife turns betrayer, Elena Carter's web of lies." My photo taken from years ago was plastered on every channel. The article accused me of forging documents, of lying about my ownership, of plotting against my own husband for money. It was filled with half-truths and outright lies. Daniel's side had moved fast. He had hired people to smear me, to poison my name in the public eye. Ava called me almost immediately. "Elena, don't panic. This is what they do. It's classic damage control. They'll try to ruin your reputation before the truth can fully sink in. But I've already started countering it. I've got journalists digging into the evidence you gave me. They'll publish soon. Just stay calm." I thanked her, but inside anger burned hotter. They had called me jobless for years, and now, even after the truth was out, they were still trying to paint me as a liar. Later that day, Victor messaged me urgently. "We need to meet. Something big is happening." I met him in the small cafe again, and he looked worse than before. Pale, nervous, his hands shaking. He slid another envelope across the table. Inside were emails between Daniel and a group of people I didn't recognize. The emails mentioned not just Project Lantern but something else. Something called the network. These weren't just business partners. These were dangerous people. The emails spoke about shipments, money laundering, and something even darker. Silence. People who got too close were handled. My stomach tightened as I read those words. Victor leaned closer. "Elena, this isn't just about Daniel and his friends anymore. They're part of something bigger. The network is dangerous. If they find out you're the one pulling this down, they won't just smear you. They'll come after you." I felt a shiver go down my spine, but I kept my voice steady. "Let them come. I've been hiding for too long. Now I'm done hiding." That night, the retaliation turned violent. When I returned home from Clara's office, I found the door to the penthouse forced open. The lights were off, the air thick and wrong. I walked slowly, carefully, my heart pounding. Then I saw it. The living room was destroyed. Glass shattered, furniture overturned, drawers pulled out. On the wall, written in red spray paint, were the words "Stay quiet or else." My chest tightened, but I didn't back down. I took a photo, sent it to Clara, and then called the police. When they arrived, they looked uneasy. They said they would file a report, but their eyes told me they were afraid to get involved. I spent that night in a hotel, alone in the quiet room. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about everything. Daniel was desperate now. Adrian and Marcus were desperate too. They were losing everything, and desperate men are dangerous. But that was exactly when they made mistakes, and I was ready to catch every mistake and use it against them. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, Daniel's voice came through, cold and sharp. "You think you've won, Elena, but you've only opened a door you don't understand. The people I work with, the network, they won't let you tear this down. They'll destroy you. You should have stayed in your place." His words were a threat, but they only made me stronger. "No, Daniel," I said quietly. "It's you who should have stayed in your place. And soon you'll be begging for mine." I hung up, my hand steady. Over the next days, the fight grew fiercer. Articles appeared attacking me. But Ava's stories began to spread too. She published proof of Daniel's offshore accounts, proof of Adrian's harassment cases, proof of Marcus's fraud. The world was beginning to see the truth. Some people still doubted, some still believed the lies. But the tide was turning. Meanwhile, Clara worked with the authorities to freeze their accounts. I watched as one by one, their fortunes slipped through their fingers. Marcus tried to transfer millions overseas, but the transfer was blocked. Adrian tried to call in favors with officials, but his calls went unanswered. Their empire was crumbling, and I was the one swinging the hammer. But the deeper truth Daniel had warned me about still haunted me. The network, who were they? How deep did this go? Then Victor gave me the answer. One night he showed up at our meeting place looking terrified. "Elena," he whispered, "I can't keep this inside anymore. The network is tied to your past. They were involved in the hostile moves against your family years ago. The reason your father's small business collapsed, it was them. Daniel knew. He married you because of it. You were their target all along." The world seemed to spin for a moment. My father had lost everything when I was younger. A collapse that never made sense. He had died broken, humiliated, leaving me with nothing but determination to fight. And now I learned it wasn't an accident. It had been part of their network, part of their greed. Daniel had known. He had used me, manipulated me, stolen from me, all while hiding the truth of my father's destruction. I sat in silence, my anger deeper than I had ever felt. This was no longer just revenge. This was personal in a way I had never imagined. My company, my life, even my family's past had been poisoned by them. And now I would cleanse it all. That night, I stood by the hotel window, looking at the city glowing below me. My reflection stared back, not the silent wife, not the mocked woman, but the hunter I had always been. Daniel thought he had burned me out, but he had only lit the fire, and now that fire was spreading, consuming everything he and his circle had built. They had tried to smear me. They had tried to scare me. They had even threatened my life. But nothing could stop me now. I whispered to the night. To myself, to my father's memory. This ends with me. I will not only take them down, I will end the network itself. And with that promise, I began planning my final strike. The night before the end, I barely slept. I stood by the hotel window, staring at the city lights and feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Daniel's threats echoed in my head. The spray-painted warning on my wall, the knowledge that my father's downfall had been planned by the same network Daniel had worked with. It all came together in my chest like a heavy stone, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready. Tomorrow would not just be the end of Daniel and his circle. Tomorrow would be the end of the network's hold on my life. The day began quietly, too quietly. I met Clara in her office early in the morning. She was calm, as always, her eyes sharp, her hands steady. "We've frozen most of their accounts," she said. "The authorities are closing in, but Daniel won't surrender peacefully. Be prepared." I nodded. "I'm not expecting peace. I'm expecting a fight." Clara gave me a long look. "Then let's end it." Later that afternoon I received a message from Victor. Just one line, Doc 3. Tonight, I knew what it meant. Another shipment, another secret move by Daniel and his allies. It was the perfect place to finish this. If I caught them red-handed with the shipments, it would be over completely. No lies, no denials, no escape. The night was cold as I drove toward the docks. I wore black, my hair tied back, my phone recording everything. Ava had already positioned a photographer nearby ready to capture whatever happened. Clara had alerted the authorities, but I knew they might be slow to arrive. Men like Daniel always had ways of delaying the law. I had to be ready to face him myself. The docks were quiet except for the sound of water lapping against the wood and the hum of engines. I hid in the shadows and waited. Minutes later, trucks rolled in. Men climbed out, strong and rough, carrying crates into the warehouse. And then I saw him, Daniel, standing tall, his face hard and angry. Adrian was beside him, and Marcus too, both of them pale and desperate. They looked nothing like the proud men at my dinner table weeks ago. They looked like hunted animals, clinging to the last scraps of power. I stepped out of the shadows. My heels clicked against the concrete, echoing in the cold night. "Daniel," I called. My voice was steady, strong. He turned, his eyes widening for a moment, before narrowing with fury. "Elena," he hissed. "You shouldn't be here." I walked closer, unafraid. "I should be everywhere you don't want me to be. Tonight is the end, Daniel. For you, for your friends, for the network." He laughed, but it was hollow. "You think you can destroy us? You think one woman can take down all of this?" He gestured to the crates, to the men, to the shadows behind him. "You're nothing without me. You were always nothing." I stopped a few feet away from him. "No, Daniel. I was everything before you. I built this company before you ever touched it. You stole from me, you mocked me, you broke me down. But you forgot one thing. You forgot that I remember who I am, and tonight you lose everything." Adrian stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "You should have stayed quiet, Elena. Now you've ruined everything." He pulled a gun from his coat, pointing it at me. For a moment the air froze. But before he could pull the trigger, one of the crates behind him burst open. Armed officers stormed out, shouting commands, weapons raised. Clara had timed it perfectly. The authorities had arrived just in time. Chaos erupted. The men carrying crates dropped them and tried to run. Officers shouted, tackling them to the ground. Adrian tried to fire, but a shot from the officers knocked the gun out of his hand. Marcus stumbled back, screaming that it wasn't his fault, that he had only followed orders. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes burning into mine. He tried one last time. He ran toward me, his hand reaching for my throat. But I was ready. I stepped aside, grabbed his arm and shoved him hard. He stumbled forward and fell to the ground as the officers rushed in, pinning him down, his face pressed against the concrete, his rage spilling out in a scream. "This isn't over, Elena. You don't know what you've started." I looked down at him, calm and cold. "No, Daniel, it is over. You just lost." The officers dragged him away, along with Adrian and Marcus. The trucks were seized. The crates opened, revealing weapons and illegal goods that confirmed everything. The network's shipments were exposed. The law had what it needed now. When it was finally over, I stood alone at the docks, breathing in the cold night air. For years I had been silent, mocked, dismissed, erased. But now I stood tall, victorious. My husband was in chains. His friends were finished. Their empire was gone. The next weeks moved quickly. News exploded across every channel. Daniel and his circle were charged with fraud, harassment, money laundering, and trafficking. Their faces were splashed across the media, no longer proud but broken. The world saw them for what they really were, and the world saw me for who I really was. The founder, the owner, the woman who had taken back everything they tried to steal. Carter Technologies was mine again, but it was no longer just a company. I rebuilt it, reshaped it into something stronger, fairer, cleaner. I tore down the corruption and built new policies to protect workers, to empower women, to make sure what happened before would never happen again. The employees who had once been silenced now had a voice. The company became a place of growth, not fear. On the day I officially took the title of CEO again, I stood before the entire staff. Cameras flashed, reporters listened, employees clapped. I looked out at them and said, "What began as revenge has become something greater." This company was born from a dream, stolen by greed and rebuilt by truth. Today we rise again, not as the empire of a few arrogant men, but as a family, as a team, as a place where everyone matters. The applause filled the room, loud and alive. For the first time in years, I felt peace. That night, alone in my office, I looked at my reflection in the glass window. I was no longer the quiet wife. No longer the woman mocked as jobless. I was Elena Carter, the founder, the CEO, the survivor, the executioner. I had taken back what was mine. I had destroyed the men who tried to erase me, and I had rebuilt something better from the ashes. Daniel's last words sometimes echoed in my mind, his warning that I didn't know the full truth. Maybe the network was bigger than I realized. Maybe there were more battles waiting in the shadows. But I was no longer afraid. If the fight came again, I would be ready, because I had already walked through fire and come out stronger. This was the end of one story, and the beginning of another. My revenge was complete. My empire was reborn. And my name, the name they tried to erase, now shined brighter than ever. I am Elena Carter. I am 34 years old. They once called me jobless, useless, nothing. Now the world calls me what I always was. The woman who wins.